Limited and Chairman, Association of Bankers, Bangladesh, ABB. Dr. Faisal Ahmed, Chief Economist, Bangladesh Bank. Mr. Hitoshi Hirata, Chief Representative, Japan International Cooperation Agency, Bangladesh Office. And Mr. Manmohan Prakash, Country Director, Bangladesh Western Mission, Asian Development Bank, ADB. I request our respective session chair, keynote presenter, and speakers to come up on stage and take seats. Thank you all for joining here us today, and we are looking forward to a knowledgeable discussion on the infrastructure development in Bangladesh and future aspects. I'd like to request the session chair of the session, Mr. Shubhashish Bose, to take over the session.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. It's my great pleasure and honor to be here as the moderator of this session. This session is, of course, very important because this relates to infrastructure, financing the future. I welcome the keynote speaker and the speakers. Especially very warm welcome to Mr. Arif Khan, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of IDLC Finance Limited. And welcome to all the esteemed speakers. Mr. Joost Juitbar, Chief Executive Officer, Gardano Development, Netherlands. Okay, good. Mr. Syed Mahbubur Rahman, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Dhaka Bank Limited and Chairman, Association of Bankers, Bangladesh, is also very much here. Dr. Faisal Ahmed, Chief Economist, Bangladesh Bank. Mr. Hitoshi Hirata, Chief Representative, Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, Bangladesh Office. Mr. Manmohan Prakash, Country Director, Bangladesh Resident Mission, Asian Development Bank. So, first of all, I would like to invite Mr. Arif Khan, who has been very much known to us, and he is the Chief Executive Officer and the Managing Director of the IDLC, a very well-known company in Bangladesh dealing with finance in various sectors of the economy. I would like to invite him to present his keynote speech. That is, he will be working as a keynote speaker here.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and good afternoon to all of you. Very well distinguished moderator of today's session, Honorable Secretary of Bangladesh Government, Ministry of Commerce, very renowned personality with wealth of knowledge. And the distinguished panelists sitting here, all of them are actually, by their own name and deeds, are very much known to our ecosystem regionally and internationally. So it's my great privilege to stand in front of you today to discuss about the infrastructure Bangladesh. And we all know that we are talking about the infrastructure needs for Bangladesh and the question how to finance that infrastructure. So I will gradually unfold my experiences and thoughts about how to go about this. To start the discussion, we first need to understand where we are now and what are the gaps and how to resolve the gap. Where we stand, we all know that this year our current GDP growth rate stands at 7.86%. But if you take the average of last one decade, it is almost 7%, which is one of the fastest growing economy in the entire Asia Pacific region. The per capita income has moved up to more than $1,700. And I think that the catalyst of this development is the prudent leadership of the current government and the private sector investments. Look at our development strategy and scenario. Bangladesh has invested last year $6 billion, which is around more than 3% of our GDP, actually which is 3 times higher than the money we used to spend just 7 years back. Our annual development plan last year is around $20 billion. It was 10 years back, it was less than $7 billion. Our garment export is now more than $30 billion. We have seen 8.7% growth. Our remittance is almost $15 billion, still here also 17% growth. And the very late, to stop the economic scenario projection, very latest report by HSBC, the global financial institution giant, they said that Bangladesh will be the biggest mover in GDP ranking in the entire world by 2030. In next 12 years time, Bangladesh GDP, which is now currently $300 billion US, will move to $700 billion US, and the country's ranking would be moved to 26 from its current 41st level, which is a remarkable projection. And we all know that Bangladesh, whatever it achieved in the last 20 years, I think we are all believe that we are going to achieve this number, and because the giants in the world are believing in Bangladesh. Now, question is that we all know that in every economy, initially it is an agrarian economy, and then it moves to textile and manufacturing, and the next phase is infrastructure, and that's the topic we are talking here today, how to finance that infrastructure in Bangladesh. Now, what are the challenges of infrastructure financing? We all know that these mega projects that government has recently taken, Podda Bridge, Paira Seaport, Metro Rail project, Rupur, nuclear power plant projects. Government has established ITCOL, Infrastructure Development Company, Bangladesh Infrastructure Finance Company, PPP office. All the works are going on, but still there is a huge gap in our infrastructure financing. How to go about to solve that problem? Our development partners, JICA, World Bank, IFC, other DEG, everybody is working with us. Now, the next level question is that if we look into this figure, you see that Pakistan invests around 1.68% in infrastructure as a percentage of GDP, India almost 4%, Vietnam 5.24%, Cambodia 3.83%, Bangladesh 3.11%. Bangladesh, although many people talks about Bangladesh is doing very good, but I would say that Bangladesh has possibly missed two opportunities. If we don't compare Bangladesh performance with the recent development with other countries, then we cannot see the picture. Bangladesh actually missed the opportunity when Thailand and Bangladesh was in almost similar stage, but now Thailand is much, much bigger economy, and this year they're possibly investing $30 billion US in infrastructure. And recently another frontier market, Vietnam, we also compare with Vietnam, and if we compare with Vietnam, we will see that their investments in infrastructure is almost 6% this year, and we are still 3%. Now, how to catch up? And if we miss this bus, when everybody is talking about that Bangladesh has a favorable demography, in next 15 years we can have reasonable growth, like HSBC predicted, but the question is that how to finance that infrastructure fund? From where? Look at this number. Bangladesh still 90% infrastructure funding comes from the government, and average other developing countries around 70%. So private sector actually participates in other countries more, almost 30% in the infrastructure, but we don't see anything happening. We know that PPP project has been set up for the last couple of years' time, but not yet significant success has come out from that PPP. Look at this competitiveness of business index of the regional countries and the peer group. You can see that Bangladesh's score is 106. India is almost on the top. Actually, in this region, top Vietnam, Cambodia, then Bangladesh, Pakistan. And if you look into our infrastructure competitiveness also, there also we are lagging behind. Now, the latest foreign direct investment came by selling of Akij Group by Japan Tobacco. You can see they have bought this company $1.5 billion US. Still in this competitive index rank, world is believing in Bangladesh. But if you can improve the ranking like India has done, they have moved up by 33 points in just 2 years' time. If Bangladesh can do little bit there in improving our situation in competitiveness index, I think lot more foreign direct investment can come to Bangladesh, and that can help our infrastructure development. we all know this nature of the projects are very long term. Many people talk about the banks can finance, but actually banks are not equipped to finance infrastructure. They are mostly short-term financing organization. Their asset liability gaps are, in Bangladesh still there is huge gap, but if you go for infrastructure financing by the banks, it will be even bigger disaster. What has happened in Thailand, that's a case what we can follow in the regional market. Their PPP projects are almost funding 27 to 30% of the infrastructure funding. The state-owned organizations has got surplus money and they are investing heavily in infrastructure funding. But in Bangladesh, what is happening? The state-owned organizations are losing money and we are recapitalizing with them with hard-earned taxpayer money. We need to look into those areas. Our capital market is mostly equity-based. There is no bond market existent in Bangladesh. There are only 3 listed companies, and we all know that Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Commerce, Government, World Bank, we have been talking to develop bond market for the last 15 years, but nothing significant has been yet happened. And we have seen that interest rate, there is a monster in the whole system, that National Savings Certificate, which is offering a very high rate, and that is kind of creating a huge obstacle in developing a bond market. And we need to do something to create a market-based yield curve so that the bond market can be developed. We need to have some hedging instruments. I'll come back later on these points. But now let's come to the solution first. How can we do? In the next 24 years, Bangladesh needs $608 billion in infrastructure funding. And we say that we can manage $400 billion plus, we need additional $200 billion. Now the question is that where do we get this $200 billion? Almost every year, $10 billion. And look at Bangladesh last year's this year currently investing Bangladesh $6 billion. So where do we get additional $10 billion every year? I can tell you the story, real story, that how can we actually improve our infrastructure funding gap. The $6 billion we invest, if we can improve project efficiency and some delay-related issues, then we can actually get additional 40% better return from them. If we improve our tax GDP ratio, which is currently 10%, and if you compare with the other regional tax GDP ratio, regional countries, you will see they are 14, 15, 16%. If we can reach to 15% tax GDP ratio, we can get huge amount of money which can be transferred to the infrastructure funding. Existing Bangladesh system can actually provide funding to have at least double the size of the GDP in infrastructure funding. But the question is that we need to improve the system and to reduce some system loss. But the real issue is that how the bond market can be developed, that has to be designed by the government and has to be really looked into. Another source of funding for infrastructure, which we never discuss, is private equity industry and VC industry. If you look into India, every year they attract $20 billion in private equity and VC industry. And in Bangladesh, foreign direct investment only comes $2 billion. In last 4 or 5 years, average $2 billion. So $20 billion money comes to the country through the foreign investors through the route of venture financing and private equity. Where is the ecosystem for that? Are we really targeting that those foreign investors can come and invest? And you can see all these world-class companies created by the private equity and venture capital. What are the game plan for the government? Look at India. The Modi government has a dedicated office, dedicated interministerial board to help the private equity and VC industry, and from every corner of the world, money is going to India through this private equity and VC. I think that can be a great route. Even if we start today, in a couple of years' time, we can build the ecosystem. In 5 years' time, we can see huge influx of money will be coming to Bangladesh, because every international investors cannot ignore Bangladesh anymore of this 160 million population, where the per capita income is expected to exceed $2,000 by 2021. So it is a great country where people can have more business opportunity. Bangladesh can also think issuance of sovereign bond. We know that there was a discussion in the Ministry of Finance that whether Bangladesh can issue a $1 billion bond. We know that Taka bond. And we know that in India they have issued Masala bond. And when Chidambaram, the finance minister, inaugurated that, they all were so upbeat that how can they attract foreign investment, foreign bond in the country that helps the country for branding internationally, can have a rating internationally, so that private sector organization can also get higher amount of money. But there is a concern, everybody talks about if we raise money by issuance of bond, what will happen to debt repayment in future. But look at Bangladesh debt GDP ratio, which is currently 27%. And it was actually in 2002, it was 50%. Debt GDP ratio, but we have reduced it to 27%. In Thailand, it is 41%. So Bangladesh is actually in one of the most comfortable scenario in public debt to GDP ratio. We can actually attract more money through issuance of sovereign bond, and once government issues sovereign bond, we get the rating upgraded and we get a international exposure of Bangladesh. Private sector can also attract more money from foreign direct investors. We can also mobilize patient capital from DFIs. Actually, DFIs always look into that, what are the efficiency of the project implementation. We are listening to a lot of speakers in different time that Bangladesh project implementation experience is not that, that encouraging. In many cases, we can improve. I think that's a huge area. Bangladesh government can also design some credit enhancement mechanism through which private sector organizations can also issue kind of 30 years bond and can participate in infrastructure, and government can design some credit enhancement scope, some guarantee, limited scale, which has been very common in Vietnam. Another model Thailand has adopted very significantly, that they invite foreign investors that come and build projects, and you operate the project, and you collect the money through toll, and you repay you get your money back in 25 years, 30 years, and then you transfer. So build, own, operate, or build, own, transfer can be a huge source of raising money by the government. We all know that whatever happened in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in currently happening in Vietnam, these are all known to us. I think Bangladesh needs to improve its overall diversity of funding sources in terms of infrastructure financing. And there are discussion in the concerned level that build, own, transfer things may not be good. Like there are certain concerns that Chinese investors invested in Sri Lankan port, and Sri Lankan government could not pay the money, and eventually they bought the entire stake in that port. So these are very, very outlier examples, but there are many, many examples around the world that initially when the economy grows, they give this opportunity to the foreign investors, and they build the projects, and then they get the money, and finally they transfer it to the local people. So we need to find out the viable projects, in some cases manage its risk in terms of foreign exchange, indexed revenue by hedging mechanism, and also we need to sometimes make sure in certain private sector projects that the government can be a buyer and can ensure minimum guaranteed payments. I already discussed about the Thailand success stories and Vietnam success stories. I think the latest development in Thailand, what they are doing, they are coming up with Future Fund. It's a private sector fund. I tell you one example, that Jamuna Bridge is a successful project of the government. There are, in India, when the Indian government needed money, they offloaded the Coal India 30% share, and they raised $3 billion. And they invested that $3 billion in other infrastructure projects. So Bangladesh has got many successful projects where we are getting cash flow. And what is the problem? We issue money by securitizing that cash flow and issuing a bond and using that money into other projects. In Thailand, they have infrastructure fund where private sector people are also investing. And we are raising huge money by issuance of national savings certificate. We can get a portion of that money in long term by adding some sweetener effect, and private investor can invest in those bonds. So infrastructure fund, the future fund in Thailand, what is happening then? It's kind of a private sector fund and listing into the capital market, and like crowdfunding, common people are buying that bond and it's being traded in the market. So it's just the beginning. I'm sure that we have lots of options. We can improve the tax GDP ratio, we can improve the bond market, we can improve the quality of the project implementation, we can go for setting up infrastructure fund, we can go for securitized bond, we can also go for some project-specific PPP, private sector participation. So I'm sure all the topics that I have covered so far are known to all. Now the question is that we need to take a complete big picture and attack the problem. I'm sure what Bangladesh is spending currently, $3 billion, if we take all these measures, in 3 years' time, Bangladesh can actually take almost $10 billion projects. Even Vietnam, last year, they are now targeting to launch some very specific private sector IPO to raise the money. So I'm sure in this context, what Bangladesh has achieved so far, if we target all this in this way, Bangladesh can achieve its overall goal to become the 26th country by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arif Khan, for your excellent presentation. We have learned about the standing of Bangladesh at the current point of time, and also the development projects that have been taken up by the private sector and public sector of the country. And our development story has also been highlighted by you. And how to face the challenges for financing infrastructure in Bangladesh. The various projects, mega projects that have been taken up by the government of Bangladesh. And the organizations you have also mentioned about who are actually financing the projects in Bangladesh. And you have also mentioned about the success story of Thailand, Vietnam, etc. And you have also mentioned about the gap, in the investment gap, which we need to fill in from reliable sources. You have mentioned about hedging instruments and also about the private equity, sovereign bonds, capital market development, etc. You have also highlighted on the build, own, operate system of financing in various projects in the country. So this is, of course, very much encouraging for us, and we have to proceed towards that direction. We understand that infrastructure is of utmost importance to us in order to have our socio-economic development. What Bangladesh will be in the very near future, that is by the year 2030, Bangladesh would become the 26th largest economy of the world. At this point, Bangladesh is the 31st largest economy in PPP terms. So the vision of the government is to turn Bangladesh into a digital economy and a developing economy by the year 2021. And also another vision of the government is that we have to turn the country into a developed economy by the year 2041. So in order to achieve those targets, we need to work accordingly. And infrastructure is very much needed for that. In a recent study, we have found that Bangladesh is in the 49th position of nations, what we should say, that's the scenario of the country among so many countries of the world. Build our image. And we are actually 5 notches up in that rating. And we believe that it is because of the gaining confidence from the international buyers. Our different sectors are gaining confidence, and they are now promoting their products. Diversified the various sectors of the economy, not only limited to garment sector, but also expanding to various sectors of the economy. And we understand that we have got a target of earning 60 billion US dollar by the year 2021 from various sectors of the economy. If we want to achieve that target, we are very much needed in attracting investment, and infrastructure investment is of utmost importance to us. Because in order to integrate the regional economies, our infrastructure should be developed. Otherwise, we cannot reach that target. So we believe that DCCI has organized this seminar, and I believe this is a timely step taken by them. We have to attract foreign direct investment. We have to attract investment in our infrastructure, and infrastructure in Bangladesh is developing so fast, I believe. A lot of companies are interested in investing in Bangladesh. US companies, German companies, French companies are, of course, interested in the power sector, telecom sector, etc. So we believe that we have to combine the human capital with the infrastructure so that we can have rapid success in attaining that benefit. So I thank Mr. Arif Khan for his wonderful presentation. Now, I would like to invite okay. Our speaker, Mr. Just Juidberg, Chief Executive Officer, Corridor Development, the Netherlands, to make a remark on the keynote speech. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. How to finance the missing billions. Indeed, and I take great note of your suggestions, Mr. Khan, and I have one more to make. So, esteemed Chair, Mr. Khan, my fellow panelists, Honorable DCCI Chairman and members, the audience, good afternoon. My name is Joost Zuidberg. I head a group that tasks itself to provide risk management products to investors, whether they are local or international, so that they can invest in meaningful infrastructure in developing countries. We do this all over the world. We have a particular focus on this part of the world, South Asia, Southeast Asia, as well as Sub-Saharan Africa. And you have heard my colleague Nishant speak in the previous session. We ask ourselves this question all the time. We find that the situation that I find in Bangladesh is unique. We see the same in a number of larger African countries. We see the same in a number of Asian countries. And we have an interest to push or to explore a solution which is to use the local capital markets for the simple fact that if that is successful, it has a number of features that are more sustainable than others. If you use local capital markets, you're naturally in the local currency. The tenor becomes, once accepted, a lot easier to do, and it is certainly more resilient in the face of crises that happen from time to time. Local domestic investors tend to keep going with their interest rather than international investors then no longer being interested. However, this is not an easy task. As the previous session also showed, the local financial system in most developing countries is not equipped to understand, assess, structure the credit risks associated with very long-term investing in infrastructure. On the other hand, infrastructure investments are demonstrably the least risky to invest in a country that is in its way of development. It is certainly better than investing in corporates. And so on the one hand, you have an asset that looks proper for institutional investors, and on the other hand, you have a catalyst requirement. And we believe the catalyst could be a guarantee instrument which can be scaled so that at the start, the credit risk is either zero or minimal, and then you can see whether interest develops further. it is our proposition that if you remove credit risk from the equation and essentially issue a AAA rated local bond, you can hope that volume will be unlocked faster and hopefully fast enough. This is a model that we have actually implemented in Nigeria. It is functional since about 1.5 years ago, and it's done its first transactions. It is a guarantee institution that is funded by capital from the Nigerian institutional market, predominantly the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund, assisted with Guarantco, and has a capacity to transact $1 billion equivalent, purely targeting its own institutional investor market. And there is a soft benefit to that, is that the investors really appreciate the focus that is placed on them. And therefore, the mentality changes. And the Nigerian pension funds are now looking at investment a lot different than what they did before. It's no longer a problem, it's an opportunity. And the reason I'm here today is that we are planning for a number of visits to Bangladesh to see if we could maybe replicate this model. And if we can, again, the idea is we will look for Bangladesh equity to take the risk of credit away from the pension funds, who can then invest in a AAA paper, hopefully at the scale that can assist in filling that gap that Mr. Khan is talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jitberg, for your nice comments. You have mentioned about the mitigation of risk, of course, and also to follow the international global system to replicate in Bangladesh in a proper way so that we can have benefits. We understand that the economic benefits and commercial benefits, those are very important to take into account. And infrastructure financing will require billions of dollars. Structuring financing will need commitment from three main stakeholders: private sector, public sector, and the international development partners. The focus should be to encourage public-private partnership, both local and foreign. And size is, of course, an important determinant in attracting foreign lenders or investors. Banks and investors would be looking to participate in larger transactions in order to justify the time and effort required for due diligence and other tasks. So these are the factors we have to take into account for financing infrastructure in Bangladesh. So now I would like to invite Mr. Faisal, Dr. Faisal Ahmed, the Chief Economist of Central Bank, for his kind remarks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. It's a cold room, and I know all of you have been sitting here listening to us talk in billions of dollars. Sometimes we get lost how big those numbers are, especially when, as an economist, we tend to look at things with two hands, package good news and bad news. So in that spirit, what I thought I would do is that, given this topic is financing the future, financing infrastructure, I will talk about broad parameters of what resources are available within the economy. First, First, a few points about what Arif Bhai presented, a very wonderful presentation. On the Thai example, the Thai BTS success story, I think there are two lessons from the Thai BTS. One was government was involved. Second lesson from Thai BTS, which is the metro, is that the private sector ended up paying a lot, and it may not be replicable. If we want to replicate it, government will have to step in. The Vietnamese bond issuance, which was done in 2005 and 10, the broad lesson from us is, if you borrow from abroad, you better use it well. In Vietnam's case, it was borrowed, misspent by Vinashin. And another lesson I want to add in financing the future, that's true for India and that Arif Bhai mentioned. Banking system, it's not the solution for infrastructure. Let's make it clear. Banking system, it may have worked for power in the early stage. Banks are not going to be a solution. India is in difficult struggle because of financing infrastructure, and we cannot afford that. So with that, let me just mention a few other things. For infrastructure, very nature of financing is most of the revenue is in taka. So we have to unlock taka financing. If we borrow from abroad, we have to make sure those who are lending us has opportunities to take the revenue back and manage their risk. So risk management in borrowing is going to be very important. We talked a lot earlier this morning, PM mentioned, and later on subsequent longer term financing. But let me just add in terms of longer term financing, I don't think money is a problem, but as investors, we have to be mindful that interest rates have to be higher. When you're expecting to borrow long term, better be ready to pay higher and better be ready to manage it. In the end, in this session on financing, let me mention much more than financing. It's the structuring of the deal, it's the right sizing of the deal, developing capacity to manage, managing the governance from the initial procurement to subsequent management and the construction management. Those are the real bottlenecks. On economics, here the only chart, it's a crowded chart, I want you to keep in mind. Let me just supplement this few things that Arif Bhai mentioned. Compared to the other EM space, Bangladesh performance, not only it's steady and high, it has outperformed other emerging market growth. Why is that important? It's important because it helps us issue bonds if and when we want to at a lower cost. This is again a crowded chart. This is what the rating agencies look. Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, they look at a few variables. Compared to other countries who are similarly rated, as you can see, Bangladesh is on the left of all of those rating criteria. Meaning, if we want to, if and when we issue sovereign bonds, we can issue at a sort of favorable rate. So external financing, when properly structured, is available. Let's focus a little bit what sort of financing, ultimately financing, domestic financing. Remember I mentioned taka financing. How much savings we have within the economy every year. This is Bangladesh savings rate relative to other Southeast Asian economies. The main thing to keep in mind from here, Bangladesh's domestic savings is more than $90 billion. So if we can tap in, the savings is quite enough. Our investment is also quite high, but without infrastructure improvement, the productivity of this is going to be an issue. How is this, our investment currently financed? You can see Bangladesh is in red. Only a small part of our financing is going through the formal financial system. So there's a tremendous market development agenda that we have to work on if we want to upgrade the amount of financing. Arif Bhai and everybody mentioned about the bond market. It's a paradox. We have one of the highest savings, more than $90 billion of savings every year, but we have one of the smallest bond market. I think it's not one reason. There is policy gaps, there is market issues, there is market infrastructure issues. We need to all simultaneously work on all of them. Don't let an economist or a consultant tell you fixing one thing will solve all of it. It's a collected problem. It's very much like solving the traffic problem. Capital market, you also know the story, but this is what we'll have to work on, both on bond and the equity market in the next 5 to 10 years. This has to be a bigger part of the agenda, and governance is going to be a key part in sort of solving it. Trust and governance. There is no quick, easy way to fix this. Finally, I feel slightly bit nervous in a DCCI conference to share this chart, but let me do it anyway in presence of the president. So this is our tax revenue relative to GDP. We don't have to move to improve our tax collection to advanced economy. If we just get to India's level, every year you will have more than $20 billion of additional public resources to spend. Even if you spend half of it, you have additional $10 billion. If we improve our tax collection, and I believe our entrepreneurs are more capable, more competent, more successful than Nepalese entrepreneurs. If we get there, I don't want to sound nationalistic, just stating out a fact. If we get to Nepal's level of collection, $25 to $30 billion of additional revenue every year, and some of that can help catalyze a far larger amount of private sector financing, and if you talk about PPP financing VGF, viability gap. A lot of gloomy news. Let me end with the last bad news and one quick good news. Last bad news, look at our FDI. Bangladesh is in red. This is in terms of GDP. This is Wendy had earlier mentioned, relative to some of the East Asian, Cambodia, Laos, that's where Bangladesh is. We will need FDI, not so much for money, but for technology, for management, and for knowledge, for the skills. We will need that. I think one strength we have, which I call density dividend, population density provides unique returns, opportunities, and also challenges for infrastructure management. It increases the return if we price things properly. It also creates a little bit of challenge. Hopefully we can manage. So with that, let me conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faisal Ahmed, for your important comments. So we understand that banks are not a solution to the financing in infrastructure. And you have also mentioned about the FDI and other issues. And we believe that we would be able to formulate our policies in such a way so that we can invite foreign direct investment, we can build up our infrastructure, and we can have instruments can finance in an. I would now like to invite Mr. Hitoshi Hirata, Chief Representative, Japan International Cooperation Agency, Bangladesh Office, for his kind remarks.
Can I use this? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, distinguished guests and participants. After following the Faisal's very good presentation, and I just would like to move back to what we should focus in the infrastructure development. I would like to highlight we should focus on the growth enhancing infrastructure. And as Mr. Chair said, the good infrastructure investment and the human capital investment is very, very important for this country to reach the goal by 2041, as Madam Hashina said. So I would like to highlight this point. Very good growth enhancing infrastructure we should select. So how we can select the good financing projects? Actually, we don't have many bankable projects. Of course, the huge demand we see, but there is not so many good bankable projects. There is an issue, and there must be many things as a government and public sector can do, and of course, development partners like ADB and IFC, JICA, we can do, and such how to say the institutional and the policy arrangement have to be well prepared, and also the good predictable market and transparent selection is also very important. And of course, the good feasibility study to select the good bankable projects also very important. And to support such good financial feasibility studies, the long-term master planning is also very important to diffuse information to private investors. For example, in power sector, there are a long-term power development plan 2016, which covered the demand forecast by 2041, and which show the direction and the policy actions which will be taken by the government of Bangladesh, and that can form the ground for the market for private investors. And I just would like to pick up one point in the power sector development plan, which shows the power demand by 2041. But there is based on the energy saving by 20%. And so we assume the 20% of energy conservation. But if we cannot, the another 20% of investment to create the power generator is necessary. So we have to combine this good planning and also the policy action to facilitate the energy savings. So those two sides are very important. And also how to create a bankable project. It is very good to keep the good dialogue between government and private investors. So this is a very good example to keep the very good dialogues. And I believe that the private investors have many challenges, so such information should be taken very well, and government should select the good policy actions. And yes, my last point is, which is related to the Faisal's comment, to increase the fiscal space is very, very important. Well, gap filling fund, of course, there is one measure, but also if the number of the PPP projects is increasing, the contingent liability the government have to face. So in order to make a fiscal cushion to respond to such liability, again, to increase the fiscal space is very, very important. So I would like to conclude. We are very positive, and from JICA, we have already supported some PPP projects in Bangladesh, and I believe the number of the PPP projects will be increasing, but proper government support to make very good policy actions are very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hitoshi Hirata, for your commitment to helping us with your assistance in PPP projects in Bangladesh. You have mentioned about the feasibility study of various projects in Bangladesh. Proper feasibility study has to be conducted, of course, and we have to look for very viable projects in infrastructure. And you have also mentioned about our dialogue with the private sector. because the government has to continue dialogue with the private sector in order to reach a consensus how to reap the benefits from the projects. And as we have heard before that banks are not a solution to the problem, so we have to look for partners, mainly individuals, companies, etc. And since Bangladesh is going to be a developing economy very soon, that is after 2024, so we can build our image and we can attract foreign loan, etc. And I believe that the rating will also be much higher that time. Thank you very much, Mr. Hirata. Now I would like to invite Mr. Syed Mahbubur Rahman, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Dhaka Bank Limited, for his kind remarks, please.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished panelists as well as the distinguished guests sitting in front of us. In fact, after listening to everything, what you have heard, especially from Faisal as well as Arif Khan, I don't have too much to say because they have addressed everything what I wanted to say. And the last thing I want to speak about, Hiroshita has already said that. So I hardly can say anything. Nevertheless, in fact, the country as a whole since independence has done really well. We have been seeing that country is growing and GDP is growing at a very high speed rate. So what is important now? To cope up with that, do we have enough fund? Can banking industry support that? We can't. We have seen in the recent past that because we are having a higher credit growth over the deposit growth. Just for funding the infrastructure as well. And Faisal rightly said, commercial banking is not a solution. We can't do that because we are having shorter term deposits and we have to give loan for longer term. And infrastructure needs 10, 15 years terms. We can't do that. But despite the fact we had been doing it, and private sector banks have done tremendously well for the growth of the economy of this country. At the moment, more than 70% of this asset is being controlled or funded by private sector banks. And there is also limitations as well, because when you look at the liability, the only liability product that banking sector has is deposits. And deposits basically is customer deposits, which is basically 3 to 6 months deposits. So each and every bank is running a huge gap in their balance sheet, which is not good on LM perspective. Now what to do? As we have seen from Arif Khan's presentation that we have a gap of $200 billion. What to do? I have been thinking for quite a number of time, quite for a long time, that we have a number of high commissions, we have a number of embassies. Can you identify few embassies or few high commissions and basically bring them into alignment and make them our real ambassador to basically sell Bangladesh? We have been doing very well, but whenever the country is being presented outside, or the perception of a country is like it's a poor country, there is issue with the politics, it is always have environmental issue, flood and other things. That's basically the real image of Bangladesh. Whenever people hear about Bangladesh for the first time, I would say that even since independence, 47 years have gone by, I think I also am responsible for that. We could not really present our country in a very positive manner, which really can attract a lot of investors. But despite that, because of the effort of the government, which you have seen in the last few years, that they have really been pushing digital economy, digital automation, and bringing in investors, and also developing infrastructure, especially in terms of economic zone. That's very, very important, because we as bank have been getting a lot of inquiries from number of investors, and they are looking for land. And Bangladesh is a very small country, where we have 170 million people, and a scarcity of land is there. But I think the present government has taken very good steps in terms of picking some special economic zone, like about 100 economic zones, which they're building all the infrastructures to bring in investors, which is very good. But the one thing also we need is just not the funding alone. We also need to improve the skill level of the people. The skill set, that's very, very important. Because we, even in terms of getting remittance, we are sending, or we are getting the lowest amount of money. Why? We are basically sending people at the lowest, which doesn't have any skill as well. So I think we need to work on that side by side. Whenever we are working on the bringing fund, we also need to improve on the skill level. We also improve, as I said, bond market need to be improved. And foreign direct investment, it is very, very poor. We could not really allure people to invest here. We could not even bring in venture capital. If you look at India, there are a lot of people are investing in India. And one of the things that we need also that we need to have an enforcement of contract, which we have been failing in terms of implementing it. That is very, very important. And I have been, I talked to a number of investors and they were saying, what is our exit route? And I think there are problems in terms of giving them an exit route because they do not understand. There are some transparency issue as well. So you also need to bring in transparency in that manner, yes, this is what. And there has to be consistency in policy because we have seen somebody has come in with some policies in hand and sometime later the policy changes. So I think for the investors that is also important whether there is a consistency in policy. On the transparency front as well, on the execution, I give you one example. In my previous organization, I arranged a syndicated, in fact, on behalf of Bangladesh Elevated Express Highway. It's a long time back. I think this is the first public-private sector partnership. I think this hasn't yet closed the financial deal. Financial closure has not been completed as yet. There are a number of issues, but this is also something which others also can see. So we have to create examples which basically will help the investors they will get motivation from there as well. They'll see, yes, this can be done in Bangladesh. Capital market is also one area where we have got problem. I think the number of steps need to be taken to rejuvenate the capital market. We also need to work on the judiciary system because there are also issues in the judiciary system as well. This also need to be, I would say, revamped. And also, last but not least, the banking system. There are issues on banking system as well, on the governance issue also. I think on the governance and on the banking system also, steps need to be taken. Because banking system in 2008, when there was a global meltdown, everybody looked at the banking system and we were very proud of our banking system. But because of some unwarranted issues in a recent few years, we have seen there has been some problem with the banking system. Is an S&P, I think, has rated banking in a scale of 10, 10 being the worst, 8, we have been ranking at 8. So I think we also need to work on that so that we can improve our banking system as well as the governance system. I think these are the few things we, if you can address. Another thing which our speakers have said, we can really bring in infrastructure financing from different sources as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Syed Mahbubur Rahman, you have highlighted so many points which are very much pertinent to our present scenario of infrastructure financing. You have mentioned about the role of the embassies. I believe the role of the embassies should be much more what it is today, because we have to build the image of the country before the foreign investors or lenders. And they are the ambassadors who have to highlight the country, who have to build image of the country before the foreigners so that they can be attracted in investing in Bangladesh. We have also got a very flexible investment policy, but that policy is not known to many people of the world. We have got SEZs, special economic zones. We have got export processing zones. We have got private economic zones in the country. And of course, the policy is very flexible. Any amount of money could be invested in Bangladesh, and dividend is fully repatriable. And after winding up of the company, the capital could be repatriated in cash or in capital machinery form, whatever it is. So these are facilities which have to be placed before the people in order to allure them to invest in Bangladesh. You have also mentioned about the predictability of the policies. Yes, we are actually doing in that respect what we can do, because we have got some policies which are for a period. That means export policy for a period of 3 years, import policy for a period of 3 years, but we have got our Finance Act, which is amended every year. The corporate taxation structure, etc., that is actually amended every year. So it is because of the needs of the government. And you have also mentioned about the judiciary system, good governance, etc., which are, of course, very much needed for building image of our country. I thank you very much for your valuable comments. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Manmohan Prakash. He is the last speaker, and I believe that he would give us his valuable inputs for guiding us in the very near future.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my sincere thanks to DCCI for organizing this very timely event. You know, future is the most beautiful word. It represents hope, aspirations, and dreams. Financing the future is even better, as it is about what kind of Bangladesh we need for our children and grandchildren. In recent years, Bangladesh has done well, with economic growth rate of over 7% in the last 4 years and a record 7.86% this year. And we believe this growth can be sustained or even reach 8 to 10% by adopting the right macroeconomic policies, prudent debt management, and investing in infrastructure, human capital, and new technologies. Today, I will focus on infrastructure investments. Currently, Bangladesh spends about 3% of its GDP on infrastructure, but 80% of the spending is provided by the government, 9% by the development partners, and 7% by banks and financial institutions. Private investment and foreign direct investments are very small. If Bangladesh is aspiring to have good roads, railways, ports, 24/7 power supply, 24/7 water supply, and achieve a developed economy status by 2041, then 3% is not enough. This needs to increase to 6 to 8% of GDP, and more financial resources need to flow into building the infrastructure. Thus, there is a need to explore diverse financing sources. Let me now share a few thoughts for today's discussion. First, utilize the resources committed by the development partners, which are over $40 billion timely and more effectively. It is heartening to note that the government utilized a record amount of foreign resources of $6.1 billion in financial year 2018 and targets to disperse $7.5 billion in the current fiscal year. This can be achieved by eliminating project startup delays, reducing lengthy approval processes, taking advanced action on procurement, land acquisition and resettlement, and improving capacities of implementing agencies. Second, unleash private sector participation in infrastructure financing. Public investments can support social infrastructure, and commercially viable projects can be bid out through competitive, transparent processes to private sector. Private sector financing enhances international best practices, new technologies, and project sustainability. Promote public-private partnerships or PPP projects by building bankable project pipeline, project prioritization, and transparent procurement practices. Catalyze foreign direct investment, which can help promote transfer of advanced know-how, technology, and business processes. Third, explore financing options. For example, mezzanine products can be utilized to make the returns more attractive than the debt, while not exposing investors to the risk associated with equity investments. Project-specific infrastructure bonds can be floated. For example, as one of the most climate-affected countries, green bonds can attract financing for sustainable projects that have positive and climate benefits. Diaspora bonds to attract financing for overseas Bangladeshi nationals could also be another option. Many foreign institutions are eager to gain exposures to the fast-growing economy of Bangladesh and support infrastructure and environmentally friendly initiatives by investing in well-structured green bonds or other thematic bonds. To address their concerns, risk concerns or low credit rating, ADB with its AAA rating is well positioned to provide credit enhancement to lower the cost of these bonds and to broaden the investor base. Significant amounts can be invested in infrastructure financing by working with financial intermediaries, mutual funds, life insurance companies, and pension funds. Innovative instruments like crowdfunding could be introduced in Bangladesh. Crowdfunding allows individual investors to connect directly with individuals or businesses looking to raise money. It enables communities to drive their own infrastructure agenda rather than relying on political and governmental processes. Friends, before I conclude, let me emphasize that we all need to explore the innovative options that are available to us. Two ideas which were heard in the last session, the use of spillover tax revenues could be one possibility. Similarly, the Hometown Investment Fund, which was also talked by Dean Yoshino, was an interesting option. ADB is a long-standing development partner of Bangladesh. We have offered $22 billion of assistance, and our support is growing. This year, our operations have already reached $3.7 billion US, which is an all-time record. We are committed to working with you in building a prosperous, resilient, and inclusive Bangladesh that everyone will be proud of. I sincerely thank DCCI for organizing this timely event and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manmohan Prakash, for your valuable comments. I believe that Asian Development Bank has to play a very pivotal role in the development of Bangladesh. You have already supported various projects in Bangladesh, and some are, of course, in the pipeline. And among the successful IPPs, Magna Guard Power was supported by the ADB and the Infrastructure Development Company Limited. And some other projects were also successful. Haripur Power by FMO, Dutch government agency. NEPC by OPIC of USA, Overseas Private Investment Company of USA. Khulna Power Company Limited by International Finance Corporation of the World Bank. IFC, ADB, Norfund, DEG, and EIB, they have also played very key roles in financing infrastructure, especially power, telecom, and largest manufacturing setups in Bangladesh. And we hope that we will continue to receive this kind of assistance from your organization as well. Thank you very much for your inputs. Now, we have to go for question-answer session. We have already got 3 people who are willing to ask questions. First one, Mr. Afsar M. Uddin, Chief Executive Officer, PPP Authority, Prime Minister's Office. Could you please ask the question to the relevant person, please?
I'm going to take the privilege to make a few comments and then ask a question, because I think just context is required. Firstly, thank you for talks, Arif Bhai. One of the things you mentioned was that PPP has been going for a number of years, but nothing really has come out of it. Mr. Hiroto, in your speech, you also mentioned the need for a very robust regulatory framework to ensure bankability of projects in order to make it happen. And this, I think, gives you the classic challenge of doing PPP. There's one group of people are saying, where are the projects? Let's make it happen right now. There's another group that says, actually, it must be structured properly for us to invest. So what we have been doing in the last few years is actually creating the regulatory framework that the government believes that the country needs to make sure that successful projects can be put in place. Now, I'm pleased to actually mention that the work we've done over the last 6-7 years has actually been globally recognized. As in, just a few days ago, I came back from Australia, where the Bangladesh PPP Authority was given, the first prize for the best PPP authority in Asia Pacific. And hopefully tomorrow I'll be able, handing that over to the Honorable Prime Minister. Now, this is very important. It's not that winning the prize that's important. What's important is the recognition that the regulatory framework is deemed as one of the best in Asia Pacific. Because what that does is gives confidence to the investors in terms of the framework that we have set up. 2 more comments and then my question. I agree with Faisal in terms of the localization. there are too many examples worldwide that people think just bring them over and apply to Bangladesh. It doesn't really work. You have to look at the local context and put that into that context. However, I think, disagree with some of the points you made about there is no role for commercial banks in PPPs. I prefer to rephrase it in a slightly different way. I believe that the commercial banks and lenders have a role as part of a package of facilities that need to be provided in PPPs. Yes, long-term financing banks doesn't really fit in, but you have short-term financing, your working capital requirements, you have refinancing and what you call hard perms and so on that you need to do. So I think there's a reason that all the banks need to come together. And now for my question, I think, and also I think what I feel is the biggest challenge for PPPs that exists is how do you best leverage financing in infrastructure? So how do you best leverage financing in infrastructure? And let me explain to you the context of my question. For PPPs to work, all the projects will actually have some impact in terms of the point that Mr. Hiroto mentioned about contingent liability. So if you want to do PPPs and you give guarantees and sovereign guarantees or payment guarantees or foreign currency confirmations, all of these will actually add up to liabilities. So government needs to identify the projects that will give the best socio-economic return. So that's the first point, is how do you determine which projects should government do? Once you've decided that, then the question then becomes like, if the multilateral banks support government by giving the sovereign loans for investing in projects, that can be a crowding out of PPP projects. There are many projects that could be done on a commercial basis that after getting sovereign lending actually goes through public funding and sovereign public limits are used up. So a port project, a road project, a power project that is sovereign funded through a multilateral finance, that is actually crowding out of the market. So again, how do we address that issue in terms of leveraging? One second context in terms of leveraging is that in terms of the decision making of projects, is there a way to blend this sovereign and multilateral support with private financing? Is there a way where government can borrow money from multilaterals on a project? Let's say half the money is borrowed from multilaterals, and the remaining half is actually raised from the markets. Then suddenly a $2 billion infrastructure requirement suddenly becomes a $1 billion private financing requirement, and $1 billion is coming from the markets. Is that a model that we can use, and is that something we should perhaps encourage? Thank you.
On the financing side of it, from the multilaterals, I think leveraging is the most important part of it. And more than the leveraging, it's also what kind of value is added. And you're probably right in the sense that when you look around, there are projects which could possibly go to public-private, but they get crowded out because the government decides to borrow from the public side of it. And that's why one of the things which we mentioned is that probably the social infrastructure projects could be the first priority of the government. The revenue earning projects, they need to really have a due diligence, and good revenue earning projects could be bidded out, commercially bidded out, and tried out for even PPPs. So that's the first question. The second question is, can multilaterals help set up this kind of fund where some part of it can come from the multilaterals and the other part could be coming from the... Surely it's possible, but again, how to structure it, what will be the terms and conditions, what will be the exchange rate fluctuations, how will this fund be managed? Those are the things that could probably need to be worked out.
Just a small addition to the first question. I know of 3 institutions who have decided to fund PPPs with 100% equity during the construction phase and then only leverage afterwards, on the grounds that that makes life a lot easier once you do get around to looking at debt, because the thing is already completed. And so they hope that they can then realize these projects faster because you don't have to spend the year negotiating with the banks.
Thank you, Afsar Bhai. I know that he has been doing really good work in setting up this PPP office in Bangladesh, has been struggling for last 3 years and has done great work. And as you said, that we are all happy that it has been awarded as the best PPP office by the Australian Authority. The point I was trying to mention is that maybe there is a communication gap. The market do not really understand that what big infrastructure projects are being carried out through the PPP engagement. So I'm sure that we need more engagement with you, and we all expect that you come up with the real office, and which you are surely in way. Like in Thailand, I have seen that 25% of their infrastructure fundings are coming through PPP route. So you can also give us that kind of result. We have all good wishes for PPP office. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to request Mr. Nishant Kumar, Executive Director, Garanto Management Company Limited, to ask your question, please.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. My question is more than an observation and comments, and probably question is hidden in those comments, and probably directed to Mr. Khan and Mr. Ahmed. I've been talking of bond market and developing the bond market and channeling, insurance funds or insurance companies or other institutional capital. What do you see is the problem? Is it the credit risk? Is it sovereign risk? Or is it lack of drive from the banks or the usual financing institutions to try something new or a new path-breaking solution? Because, through my discussions, what I have observed is there is broad framework there might be broad framework in place, but the banks are happy doing the usual stuff. The institutions are happy doing the usual stuff. The insurance companies are happy doing the usual stuff. Nobody is willing to venture out of his or her comfort zone. So is that the real cause of the problem? It's very easy to blame the government and the policy, It's also about the financial institutions themselves also taking some drastic step to change the world, if I may use that term. And Mr. Ahmed made some comments about longer term financing means higher interest rate. That is valid. But I'll probably give empirical evidence. we recently guaranteed the first ever 7-year offshore INR bond, by a company. supranationals have done that for longer than 10 years, probably. But from a corporate, it was first 7-year offshore INR bond. And IKEA invested in that instrument. And at a rate which was fixed for 7 years at a very attractive rate. And their proposition to invest was that they find as long as credit risk can be taken care of, they are happy with that kind of return. And that credit risk probably can be mitigated through credit enhancement or similar scheme. So this is probably my question, observation to both of you. Thank you.
May I answer the first part of the question, that whether there is any lack of drive from the banking and financial service executive to really develop a bond market? I think that is definitely partly a case, but there are a lot of other factors which Mr. Faisal Ahmed has mentioned. It is actually the overall ecosystem. There are a couple of issues needs to be taken away. IDLC has been issuing bond for last 10-15 years, and we were the first securitized bond issuer in the country, and that was a very struggling task for us to issue a securitized bond. Now what happens when the corporates we go for, give them advice to issue a bond, they actually are not that much interested for basically two reasons in most of the cases. It is very easy to get money from the banking system in Bangladesh. A large corporate just picks up the phone and calls the relationship manager, and he gets the fund in next 7 days time. He doesn't need to open up his books to the public. Because the moment he wants to go for issuance of the bond, at least to some private investors he needs to open up, and public bond even more disclosure required. Number two, which is more even important, is that what is the coupon rate that he's going to get? Because to him, actually, at what rate he can raise the money from the banking system versus what is the bonds coupon rate. We have seen in many cases the coupon rate that we intend to offer and raise money. We have been struggling with many. Last month we closed last 2 months back we closed 7 billion taka bond for United Commercial Bank. IDLC was the lead manager. So it was a giant task for us to raise that money because all the investors were asking that this rate we are not comfortable because you need to raise the rate. But the question is the moment we need to raise the rate 100, 200 basis point, then he gets the money from the banking system cheaper rate. So why investors do not invest in our bond at that coupon rate? Because their cost of fund is high. And when they say that bankers, individual, why are your cost of fund high? He says that I have got alternative instrument where I get higher return. So there comes the market interest rate. There is no yield curve of the government securities in this country. We have not developed any yield curve for the last, we've been struggling. So even we are not interested, government, certain cases when we issued some zero coupon bond, government has given some fiscal advantage, and in just 2 years time, suddenly NBR has changed the tax advantage and imposed something, a 2% transfer tax on this registration of the bond date. So this 2% transfer act kills the entire economics of the bond issue. So I can talk to you on this because I've been talking with the World Bank project for the last 15 years in many issues how to develop bond market. But there are some parts needs to be done by the government, some parts by the central bank, some parts needs to be done by SEC, some parts by NBR, some parts by us, and of course the issuer company also needs. So it's a total ecosystem needs to be organized. I'm sure that what we have seen in Sri Lanka or in India, we need to learn from there. So it's not only one party who's responsible.
Let me start with the second one. If you have longer term financing, you will need higher interest rates. You can have tactical issuances, timing market conditions and a few other things, or tapping in a selected investor base. But longer term financing in a 10-15 year horizon for a country like Bangladesh will require higher interest rate. There is inflation risks, credit risks, macro sovereign risks. So if you're talking about market pricing of this longer term corporate borrowing or even government borrowing, you will need longer term financing. So tactical issuances, 1 or 2 success cases, I would take some comfort from there, but a system cannot probably rely on a systematic slice of comfort. The first broader question is why the bond market is not developing. I think it doesn't have a single answer, and it also, the answer varies whether it's government or corporate. In the case of Bangladesh, in the case of corporates, why the corporates have relied on the banking system? Because that's where most of the money was, and that's where they could afford at a cheaper rate. And that's also, they probably didn't have to disclose. There is also a governance issues, right? They probably didn't have to disclose a lot of information. So the privacy issues, lot of liquidity in the system, and the rapid growth of the banking system skewed the incentive of the corporates towards borrowing. You did not develop the bond market because you did not need to. People like you and me who are writing consulting reports, they are busy saying you should. Corporate sector didn't feel the need, did not. Government case, government also did not need to borrow. In the case of that much. In the case of Bangladesh, Ministry of Finance has been relatively prudent, kept deficit below 4%. So they relied on tax performance, which has not in all that been great, issuance a little bit of bond, and the rest to the national savings certificate. So public sector did not also need to develop. Now in the next phase, both of these games are not going to work. Private corporate sector will have to, they cannot rely on the banking system anymore for the kind of, there are now many billion-dollar companies, they want to borrow $500 million. Banks cannot do it. And here let me come back to what Afsar Bhai mentioned. What I intended is that banks cannot be the solution to this problem, can be a part of one of the solutions to those. Yeah? Thank you.
We have one more question from Selim Akhtar Khan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to refer to the observation by by Dr. Ahmed of Bangladesh Bank. You are referring to the very high savings phenomena that's happening here, which is very unusual. Whereas on the other hand, you see, corporates that you were mentioning, we always depend on the banking system. Yes, we depend, but we do not like to borrow as more than we require. And one of the biggest reasons that we do not really like to borrow is the high interest rate. For the last almost 7 to 8 years, or I think more than that, 15 years, we have been borrowing from between 12% to 17%, which is the highest in the world. You don't have corporate borrowing rates of that much, at that high rate. And on top of that, as you know, we have to pay corporate taxes, which are also very high, 35% at the end of the year. And this all comes down to squeezing on our expenditures on, for example, overheads or salaries or benefits. And one of the biggest reasons why you cannot employ good people is that we cannot give them good salaries, because we have to pay all the money to the bank, we have to pay all the money to the government and VAT and everything. So the VAT is not our problem, but we have to pay corporate taxes, 35%. So after paying all that, you see, we have corporate taxes, we have interest rate, and the third part is the overhead. So we have to squeeze on the overheads. And that is one major reason that we cannot really expand, because we cannot really good people, we cannot invest in new facilities or new, whether it is manufacturing facilities or service facilities. So don't you think that the system and the factors that promote a high savings phenomenon is detrimental to the health of the country? At the end of the day, you're encouraging high bank interest for the actual corporate players. It's making them, we are very, very afraid to venture into any even medium risk or high risk areas, leave alone infrastructure. We invest in infrastructure. I have a housing company. We have companies which invest in transport, which invest in, they like to invest. There's a huge scope of investment, but the reason we don't do it is the risk, which is disproportionately high because of the high interest rate. So, your views, Professor Ahmed, thank you.
As I was listening to your question, in my head I was sort of thinking, how frank should I be when I would be responding to this question? Let me be very frank in answering the question. Your first part of the question was the unusual high savings rate in Bangladesh. Is it not unhealthy for the economy? I think the reason savings rate is very high in Bangladesh, not because of the corporates, but because of the very nature of the growth. Our growth is very bottom up. You see all this remittance coming in, and it has been an inclusive growth. That's why the savings rate in Bangladesh is high. Interestingly, corporates in Bangladesh are quite leveraged. The bigger ones are more leveraged. Unfortunately, we don't have a systemic data. But it's interesting, if you look at the behavior of the corporates, in the aftermath of the stock market boom, there was quite a bit of real estate investment. And since then, corporates have been over-leveraged. In terms of the interest rate, I think giving a number between 12 to 7% is probably less helpful. I think in economic terms, the importance is to focus on the real interest rate. Let's say if you're a good prime borrower, a year ago, you could borrow at 9%. A year ago, inflation was at 6%. So real interest rate was at 3%. Now, in an economy which is growing at 7%, retail sales would be growing at double the amount, 15%. Profitability in that economy, without looking at any number, has to be above 12, 13, 15%. If a corporate is not generating that profit, maybe perhaps that kind of corporate should not be in the business of generating. And my sense is that in Bangladesh, corporates, well-run corporates, has to be quite profitable, because, well, if you look at the balance sheet of the well-run corporates that has been growing in last 10, 15 years, the balance sheet has grown tremendously. So I would worry if the interest payment is affecting salary payment. Then I would worry about the business model. Perhaps some of the industry, perhaps your industry, real estate probably has a unique experience because in the aftermath of the stock market boom and the massive real estate run-up from 2012 to 2016, you faced a very difficult time. So I would not take that real estate experience and generalize for the corporates of the overall economy. But we can have more discussion on the optimality of interest rates. I think in Bangladesh economy that growing at 7%, real interest rate needs to be quite a bit higher. And we need to have our conversation centered around real interest rate. Nominal interest rate is less informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The final question is to be made by Mr. Shubham Islam. Please.
Hello, I'm an entrepreneur, and just like everybody in this room, a lot of my colleagues have a big dream to build $1 billion business. And my question is, my biggest challenge is infrastructure that we're all talking about. I'm hearing a lot of good thoughts, good proposal, 2 infrastructure sessions in a row, but the problem is the infrastructure is not growing fast enough. We are not able to attract the money. We had all talked about the problem, but just the money is not coming, the infrastructure is not growing, we don't have a deep sea port, that creates a huge lead time problem. The businesses that are moving from China, we are unable to take advantage of that. No matter how much we talk about the electricity, but the quality of electricity is not good, the voltage fluctuates, even on a 33 kVA industrial line, and we have a big trust issue on the global scale, which is our Bangladesh bank, central bank vault is not safe, SWIFT system doesn't work. Our banking sector, what shape it is in right now, we all know. Now, how we move forward? We have a huge potential. We have a huge potential to take this country long way. But how could we break the barrier and move forward realistically? Because I'm in a hurry. China, businesses are moving. We could take advantage of that, but we're unable to because of infrastructure. So please, can you give 1 or 2 specific examples, Mr. Faisal, Mr. Arif, and Mr. Bose, please, how we move forward?
Yeah, very vast question. I'm sure it's, but you have seen already that 7 years back, our infrastructure spending, the number today, it is 3 times higher, $6 billion. There are progress. You have seen Bangladesh economy is moving to $2,000 per capita economy. You have seen that HSBC report saying that Bangladesh will be 26th ranked country in next 12 years time. Things are progressing, but as you said, we are in hurry, we need to do more, and we all agree, and that's why we are discussing here. And I'm sure the 7th five-year plan, the government is coming up. You will see more, we are seeing more and more infrastructure spending in Bangladesh. Even in power generation, 8-10 years back, we had only 5,000 megawatt power generation. Now we are almost 16,000 megawatt power generation, and there is a huge plan by another 5 years, we will reach 30,000 megawatts. So power, infrastructure, everywhere we need more money, but money is not there. That's the topic we are discussing here. So we need to develop a lot of things we discussed. So there is no shortcut to it. I'm sure that you will see more sovereign bond issuance, more PPP office-led projects, more private equity-led investments coming in, more foreign direct investments coming in Bangladesh. And of course, better project implementation and better tax GDP ratio. All this has to come together. I'm sure the discussion is now on, and everybody is talking about Bangladesh. If Bangladesh misses this opportunity to build the infrastructure, we will miss this opportunity again. Again, like Thailand and Vietnam, again, other countries will cross us, and we will just sit here. But no shortcut. I'm sure that all of us will talk the same thing. But we see the sign of hope here that at least in the last decade, Bangladesh is one of the major growth economy and coming up in the global map. Thank you.
Let me first assure you, reduce your anxiety. Central bank's vault is safe. So with that, now that you are a bit, now that you are Kamar, let me tell you a very simple reason why a lot of these problems will be solved. 10 years ago, you did not have a conference like this, or even discussion, frank discussions like this. If you don't believe that, given your tone of your question, let me give you a cynical answer to your question. There is a lot of money to be made. There is a lot of money to be made, and we live in a compact, crowded place with people who are incredibly individualistic, incredibly aggressive. Look at our entrepreneurs. Look at our drivers. They navigate risky environment far better than even a snake would, right? So my own belief is that the instinctive ability of the individual entrepreneurs, I think that if it cooperates with the government, I think there needs to be very close cooperation, not capture. There's a distinction between cooperation, coordination, and collaboration, not capture. And that's a big risk because the corporates have become very large. I think in the next phase of development, getting capture, policy capture is the big risk. So if there is cooperation, there is a lot of money to be made by many people, not just few, all tiers. And I think that's where I see the hope, that it's a certain time and there is a certain momentum. And I think I am quite optimistic. You would not have this sort of conversation. It's easy to be cynical, it's easy to be critical. But I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of money to be made.
I've been in the banking for more than 30 years. Even in the mid-90s, you remember the port was closed for almost 3 weeks. We haven't had a problem, we grew. In the mid-90s or late 90s, there was a syndication for only 40-50 crore taka loan as well. But look at now, what is happening? Even a single bank is doing business for 300-400 crore taka. That's what we have grown to. And the people are taking a lot of risk. We have problems, we have strikes, we have hartals, but despite that, we are seeing growth. And this is us, this is you who have done it possible. So I don't think there is any shortfall of funding or anything, whatever. It's just the intention and the passion about it. And the fund is there. Fund has not been a problem to come this far. So I think it is the intention, and as JICA's chief has said, the project has to be bankable. That's important.
So I believe that your question has been answered very well. And you must be optimistic about the future of this country. Definitely you should look at the size of the economy. What you were at the time of our independence and now where we stand. So you can see the difference between the two. So I believe that Bangladesh has been branded as one of the next 11. You know that. And the economy was one of the fastest economies in the region. And once upon a time, it was used to be said that if Bangladesh can develop, then any country can develop. But the situation is not like that. So I believe that we should be optimistic about the future of Bangladesh, and we would be able to fulfill our vision 2041. And by that year, we would be able to become a developed economy. So I will not be speaking separately. I believe that we have come to the conclusion of this session, and I thank you very much. Especially, I thank the keynote speaker, Mr. Arif Khan, for his excellent presentation, and all the esteemed discussants who are present with us, and we owe to them for their valuable inputs that can guide us in the formulation of the policies of the government of Bangladesh. And also, I express my gratitude to the esteemed audience for their patient hearing. I thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for a wonderful discussion. Now, I request Nuher Latif Khan, Director DCCI, to come up on stage and distribute credits to our distinguished guest. At the very first, I request Mr. Noher Latif Khan, Director, DCCI, to hand over the crest to our session chair, Mr. Shubhashish Bose, Senior Secretary, Ministry of Commerce, Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. And now, the crest will be given to our keynote presenter of the session, Mr. Arif Khan, CEO and Managing Director, ITLC Finance. And now, I request Noher Latif Khan, Director, DCCI, to hand over the crest to distinguished speakers. Mr. Jos Zoidberg, Chief Executive Officer, Cardano Development, Netherlands. Mr. Syed Mahbubur Rahman, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Dhaka Bank Limited and Chairman, Association of Bankers, Bangladesh. Dr. Faisal Ahmed, Chief Economist, Bangladesh Bank. Mr. Hitoshi Hirata, Chief Representative, Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, Bangladesh Office. And Mr. Manmohan Parkash, Country Director, Bangladesh Resident Mission, Asian Development Bank, ADB. I request our speakers to remain on stage for photo session. Ladies and gentlemen, with the permission from the session chair, here I announce the conclusion of the session, Infrastructure Bangladesh, Finance the Future. I hope our audience enjoyed this wonderful discussion. Our next session, Innovation and Digital Bangladesh, will be held after tea break at Hall of Fame. So you all are invited to join with us at the Hall of Fame. Thank you.